Hi, today I want to show you how you can connect your Wized project with your Xano database in just a few minutes. And yeah, it's super simple. So let's get started right now. So as you can see, we have this count up where we're just going to count up with a number. But we want to have this number every time we're going to count up be updated on our Xano database right in here, let's say for the first field as an example, which it doesn't right now. So now we're going to connect it. So in Xano, if you create a database, you're also going to automatically have an API group created for that. And if it doesn't, you can just very simply manually do that and just add an API group in here. But I already did that just for simplification purposes. So what we want to do for this example is we want to do two things. Every time I click on +1, I want to send the updated number to Xano and update the record. And two, when I reload the page, I want to already have a variable with the ID set in here and get the record, the latest updated number, and set it in the variable so that we're starting, for example, at 25 and then counting up to 26, 27, 28, and so on. So let's, for simplification purposes, just change this row ID, which will just be our ID, to 1. And what we want to do is we want to right now just connect this to our Xano API group. So we're going to copy the API group base URL, which will contain automatically all our endpoints. And I'm going to show you how to configure that later on. But we're going to copy this base URL and we're going to add it as an app. So we already did some preset in here, but we're going to create a new app. We're going to call it Xano and just entries. We will select REST API if you're going to use Airtable, FastGen, Xano, BuildShip, whatever. You want to use REST API. You only want to use Supabase if you use Supabase, and you only want to use Firebase if you use Firebase. But everything else is more than likely a REST API. So Xano just considers this as one thing because they all work based on the same technology. And yeah, we just have this configured in here. And then we're just going to create now some requests. So let's just create a first request for our Xano endpoint. And let's go to Xano and see what's going on in here. So we have one request basically where I'm going to provide you the ID, and it is updating the record, as you can see in here, to 931 from 0 or initially. So just the way this record works is we're just going to add the ID, and we're going to add the count, and we're going to add the edit record based on the ID, and we're going to update the count. But this is basically all you need to know about that. There are a lot of exciting Xano videos from my good friend Ray Deck and from the Xano official YouTube channel. I will link those resources right in the video description. We're just going to cover the Whiz side of this today. So as you can see, I can update the record with this endpoint. So now we want to add this endpoint in Wized so that we don't have to trigger all of this from the debugger, but that we can trigger this from Wized. So I'm just going to name it the same. I'm just removing the slash because if I were to add a slash, it would just do an underscore, and that's like kind of clunky. So I'm just going to go into the URL endpoint, and I'm going to write return. And right now, I want to copy this extension of the endpoint. It's a bit like a URL. Think of it, you copied Amazon.com as the app, and now you want to go to /products. So we want to go now to /countup. That's the extension of our endpoint. So we're going to add quotes because we want to add this as text, and we have countup in here defined. Now we need to see this is a post endpoint because we're posting data. We're not getting data. We're updating data. We're posting it. So it is a post. And let's go to Whiz. So we're going to set this as post. And we don't need to do any URL parameters, but we need to do, and we would only need to do header if we want to do, for example, an API key, a specific content type, or authentication. We don't need to do this. Wized is smart. It will think for us. If we don't define something in here, it'll just make it work. It has a lot of magic that is going on the back end that you don't necessarily know of, and you don't need to know of, because Whiz is worrying and doing all of that for you. So we just need to pass on the ID, as we have in our endpoint right here. We have ID and count right here in the inputs. So we're just going to add ID and count. And in the value, we can just simply link this to dynamic data. So we're just going to write return. That was not return. We're going to write return. And in this case, for the ID, we're just going to select the variable for our ID. This can be dynamic. If you do an API call to authenticate a user and you're going to get a user ID back, you may want to use this ID or whatever your logic is. This is really just a very narrowed down example. But we're going to add the v.row_ID, and for the count, we're going to add our dynamic count variable, which is 0 in this case. So let's just add this to 7, and let's trigger and test. In this here, we have this plus where we can test the request. And as you can see, the record, this is the result that we got, and the record was updated to 7. So let's check in our database if that worked. And yes, it worked. We're at 7. Wonderful. Look at that. So now we need to trigger this request when we do something in the canvas. Because if I'm clicking on here to count up to 21, and I will not see this counted up till 21 in Xano, because we don't have the request for count up tied yet to an action on our Wized canvas, on our page. So we need to use an action to tie this element, this request that's happening, this action of clicking, to running this API call, of calling our Xano endpoint and telling the endpoint what's going on. So the way we're going to do that is we already have one action here in which we're going to count up and do the run function to update the variable onClick count up. We're going to do the same again, but instead of onClick counting up, onClick, we're now going to perform a request of count up, this one. So we're going to go to the action. We're going to add a new sub-action. And by the way, Wized charges you only for those actions in here. They don't charge you for sub-actions. So you can add as many sub-actions as you want. Of course, within a functional manner, you don't need to just add sub-actions just to add sub-actions. But you won't be charged if you add a second action like this on here. This will count as one action, even though we do 2 in this action instance. So just so that you know, you don't have to worry about having any limits if you do it like this. So this is just so that you know. And on click, we're now going to just prevent default just in case. And we're going to click on perform request. So the perform request will trigger this request in here, which we have already predefined, as you can see. So let's count up again, because I just updated something in here. And actually I can't, because I'm half done with it. So let's just finish the setup and then count up. So on event, click prevent default, perform request. We're going to take our count up request. So now if I click on here, and let's go to the data store just so that we see it. Every time I click, I'm running a request to update this number in here. So I can click 100 times and you will see I'm doing 100 different API calls and I'm updating the number 100 different times. And this is completely scalable. This works. Don't get worried about doing something like this if you ever need to. And as you can see, if I'm counting up till 100, I will have 100 in here. And my database will show me 100 in this record. Isn't that wonderful? Wonderful. So we got that here. Now the issue, not the issue, but the next challenge is if I'm refreshing the page, this record is still 100, but I'm not getting the initial value loaded. So we need to do now a get request to get the record, the starting count for this number in here based on the ID for the row ID 1. So I already have something prepared for you. In the Xano endpoint, we just have a custom get record to provide an ID and then do a get record from entries and return this entry record that matches the ID. Very simple stuff. So we're just going to have the ID match the input field of ID, and the record that matches will be returned. Super simple. So let's say I'm going to go with record 1. I will get a response back of ID 1, created at timestamp, and count of 100. So we just want to do the same principle here of, not moving my browser window, but of copying this extension right here. And once we got this extension copied, we just want to create a new request in Wized. We're just going to name this, remove the slash, go to Xano, and you can name this however you want. I just like to name it like my requests in Xano so that I don't get anything mixed up. And yeah, we're just going to do pre-select Xano, and we're going to go return, and we're going to add this extension in here, just like that. Perfect. And now this is a get request. So we need to select get because we're getting data. Before that, we were posting data, and now we're getting data. We're taking something. And since we're not posting data, the data is not so important that we're passing on. So we don't need a body. We can work with URL parameters because we're just getting data, but we need to give our endpoint certain parameters that we're only going to get certain data. So for example, we cannot necessarily send a file in a GET request because we're not working with data first. A POST request is data first. I'm going to send you data. This is POST. GET is, I would love to get this data that you have, and here are some parameters. Here you go. Here's the user ID. Give me what you got. So data is more, it's important, but it's more secondary of a GET request. I'm going to provide you data so that you as the backend can give me something that aligns with that data. And if you go on the other side, the POST is, here is the data, please save this. So it's similar, but completely the opposite. So this is the get. We're just going to pass this ID on as a reference so that the backend can provide us the data that matches this ID. So providing the data, returning the data is the main principle of the get, and receiving data is, or Wized posting data to the backend is the main focus of the post, just so that you know like what those differences are between those. So we're going to go do a get, and we're going to provide the URL parameter of ID. It needs to be the one that matches in our endpoint. And we're going to do return. You always got to write return, and we take this for our variable right here, like this. So I'm just going to run this, and as you can see, I'm getting the record for 100 right in here. Look at that. Perfect. So I have 100 in here, but it's not showing in here. So what are we doing wrong? No, we're not doing anything wrong. We just need to do one more step. So first of all, as you can see, I need to get this data the moment the page starts loading or the page finishes loading, which I'm not. This page load is not triggering the data in here, as you can see. So we need to create one action. Let's call this load API data. And we're going to do an event-based action, and we're going to set the trigger to page finishes loading. And we're going to create the action for perform request get start count. Now, if I'm going to load this page, as you can see, it is going to perform this request of get start count, as you can see right here. It is loading, it is doing this request right here. Now, we just need to update our variable in here for the count to match this data. So we could do one action more and just reach our limit on our Wized plan one action closer, or we could just use the power of a computed variable, like here, to get dynamic data fully reactive. So let me show you. I can just simply do return, and I can do count up. I can do get start count, and I can take the count in here. So we get the breakdown. We only need to take the count, and you have the preview in here for the data. So we could do ID. We don't need the ID. We don't need the timestamp, but we want the count. So I'm clicking on here, and I'm getting the count. Now, if I wouldn't do this as a computed variable, look what happens. I will get, oh, what did I do? Oh yeah, perfect. That was my intent. If I'm going to reload that, it will say null because nothing was initiated. This variable, if this variable is requesting dynamic data, but the dynamic data is not coming instantly, it takes some time. And therefore, it's not setting this, even though it's 100 right now. And it says 100, it's not showing the variable because it's not reactive, because it's not recalculating itself based on dependencies. But if I'm now going to check computed and reload, it will say 100. And if I count up, it will update this variable. Keep an eye on this variable. You see this? Yeah, look at that. If I count up, it will update instantly because this variable is always recalculating itself based on its dependencies. And this dependency in this case will be the result of this request. So every time this request is updating, this variable, because it is computed, will recalculate itself, which is completely amazing. Now, you may want to go even one step further and do a conditional if statement. Now, don't get scared. It's very simple. I'll take your hand here. So, if we're going to write if, and this is like Zapier, just with text. So I'm doing if, and then I'm just doing like the brackets, and I do if, and I'll just put in if, and I'll just put in the variable I want to have as the number, and I do open and close curly brace, and I do return, let's say, hey. Perfect. I will return hey if this exists, just as an example. And if I do else, return, I will do no. Not now, no. Because we got nothing. I will just return hey, because else is never met, right? I'll just bring this on one line here. But now if I'm going to, for example, reload this, and let's say this wouldn't exist. So let's say we would just have this request to load the API data, and this would be on a custom condition, and we'll just have this thing broken, right? I just want to showcase you this, how the if works. Let's redo this in here. Perfect. So as you can see, we can do if this exists, we're going to return hey, and if else, we're going to return no. So this doesn't exist, and actually we need to base this. Sorry, we need to base this on this one. So if this doesn't exist, if this is null, my bad. We need to always base this on the root, on the .data. So if r.getStartCountData is null, meaning it doesn't exist, we're going to return no. But if this does exist, like in this case, we're going to return hey. So in our example, we don't want to return hey, we want to return the count. So if this exists, if there's data in here, we're going to return 160. And if this doesn't exist, let's reload the page, we don't want to return nothing or an error. We want to set this variable to an initial state of 0, like this. So what this does in practice is if I reload the page and this request is not firing, it is just starting at 0, and I can just count up, as you can see in here, and it will work for whatever error that may occur. But if now this request is back up working at page finishes loading, and I reload the page and the data is available, it will automatically count up till 15 and have this as my start number. So you can see if the data doesn't exist, it will be set at 0, and the moment the data exists, it will be set as the value of the data that we're going to get back in the API request using a very simple if statement. So again, you have to base it on the value that will say null. Otherwise, it won't work, as you could see in my example where it didn't work for me. But if we have this .data, this is the best way to base it on. If this exists, if there's something in here, we want to return one of those values in here and set this as the variable. And if else, meaning if not, we just want to set this variable at an initial state of 0, as I already showcased you, and we do this computed, so that we can set the data dynamically and then also have that updated. And I stop at 45 and I refresh, and I'll see 45 as my initial value. And if you, for example, want to remove some of the content flashing in here, you see we could also work more with Wized Cloak, but this is completely optional. This video is just about the technical part, so we're not going to look too specific into the design and making it look too nice, but this is how you're going to make this work on a technical perspective. And yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I really appreciate all your support. And if you have any questions about Wized or Xano or REST APIs in general, please feel free to put them in the comments down below, and I'm more than happy to answer your questions or make a video about your questions. And yeah, thank you so much for all your time. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that this video really helps you out in understanding the basics of how this works. And by the way, we got the 45 in our database. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for your support, and see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.